Welcome to the third episode of Artisanal Happiness. My name is Jim and I'm happy you tuned in. So last time we discussed the mechanisms behind depression and how negative self-talk and thoughts make us feel sad and unmotivated, which leads to a worsening lifestyle. And so that means there's less and less to be happy about. In this new episode, I want to begin to look into how we can turn things around and get back on track to a more fulfilled life. Since depression affects all areas of life, growing out of it actually means to some extent that you have to rebuild your life. It's not a quick fix. And whenever I say your life, what I mean is the sum of your days, the things that you actually experience. Let's briefly pause at this idea because it's an important one. Your life as a whole is abstract. You don't experience life as one big chunk. What is a life? The way we experience life is as a series of days. And that means that whatever problems you struggle with probably have to be solved at the level of your days. The day is the space in which we can act, in which we have agency. You can bend a day to your will, but you cannot really do that to a year or a decade. Those are not directly in your control. So if you attempt to change things, you should start at the level of a day, or by extension a week, since we cannot do everything every day. But start small. For example, you cannot really switch to the state of being a novelist in a year. That's not a switch you make. The switch you actually make is you change your daily schedule to write every day. And if you keep this up, you will end up writing a book, writing a novel. And if you keep doing that for a longer period of time, you can end up calling yourself a novelist. But the actual effort you make is not made at the level of a year, it's made at the level of the day. This is the sacrifice you have to make to get something. Pay some of your current time today. One day after another, one moment to the next. In Buddhism, they often compare this to being like a string of pearls. Individual separate moments lined up on a string, passing one after another. That is what it feels like to live, going from one moment to the next. Past or future are just ideas. You cannot feel the past or the future, you only feel the now. And this idea is quite revolutionary, the longer you think about it. We only have access to the present, and everything else is an illusion. You don't believe me? You might think that you know what your past is, but do you really? I do not remember much from my early childhood, for example. Some individual scenes, but nothing too extensive. And even if we do remember things, our memory plays tricks on us. Have you ever been at a family gathering, proudly retold a story from your childhood, like remembering that wonderful green dinosaur costume you wore for a carnival ages ago? And then someone said, "Oh, that was actually your brother who did that. It wasn't you. I still have the photo." Things like this are quite common. We misremember. Every time we call up a memory from the past, our brain doesn't have access to a stable copy. Memory is not like a really accurate document showing exactly what happened. It's not a photograph. Instead, it is a reconstruction based from some essential pieces of information. And with every reconstruction that we do, every time we call up a memory, tiny changes occur. It's like a game of telephone where children pass on a secret message from one ear to the next through a room, and by the end, the final message that you get out is completely garbled and different from the original input. If you want some evidence, look into how impressionable witnesses in court can be. It's quite fascinating. So, the past is a picture painted in the present. Whatever it was, it's gone, and we can only look at pale sketches of it that are most likely not correct. Any experience is so full of detail that it is impossible to accurately capture all of it, every pixel, every smell, every nuance or emotion. So our minds simplify them down to stories. Everything in our minds is basically a gross simplification. And yet we somehow take all of this very seriously. That is one of our big mistakes. We take thoughts too seriously instead of realizing that they are simply crude approximations. So we talked about the past, but what about the future? You probably have an idea of what your future looks like, right? Or what it should look like. After all, much of what we do is moving towards a future that we want. But do you remember any time in your life when you actually predicted what would happen in the next years, where it was accurate? 5 years ago, for example, did you know where you would be today, physically, mentally? There's a really good chance that things are very different from what you expected. We cannot predict it. Life is just too complex for that. You do not know what people, ideas, or opportunities you will come across tomorrow. And meeting someone or coming across an idea can profoundly change the trajectory of your life. You might decide to live differently because of something you learned today, in this podcast even, or because of something a friend tells you over dinner about how they quit their job to pursue their passion for animals in a volunteer shelter, for example. In a very, very real sense, every day is an adventure and the door to 1,000 new ways of living. It's good to be open to that. It's good to realize that everything is changing all the time if you let it. But often we hold on to a particular state of affairs and actively work to maintain it. We do not really like change as humans. And that's normal. But becoming aware of it can help us to drop the resistance when it doesn't really serve us well. And incorrect future predictions also matter for depression, because hopelessness is a hallmark of this condition, as we already discussed. People with depression often fear bad things that could happen in the future, but excessive worry and fear of the future make very little sense, especially if they take a lot of your current energy. This is an issue that I personally have struggled with a lot, too much focus on the future. My parents used to have a shop, and their entire lives were spent working hard and building things for the future, a thriving business, a house for their children. They always had to function. And they lived with both eyes turned to the future, with very few holidays in between. Building wealth was a big priority for them, and a source of tremendous strength. I suppose I inherited much of that. And from now on, it's my job to not let this starting point be the destination of my life, and to use this starting point and deform it, make it evolve, make it develop into a direction that I find better suited for me. And I am getting better at this because I understand that it's nonsense to constantly live for the far-off future. In this moment today, you have to deal with the problems of today. Just think about the consequence of constantly worrying about tomorrow. There are two possible outcomes if you do worry a lot about the future. The first option is the problem that you are worrying about really does occur tomorrow. If it does, we can deal with it then. We will be just as capable at dealing with problems tomorrow, and there is no urgent need to pore over them ahead of time. And the second option is, if the problem does not occur tomorrow, then we have wasted precious energy and time today, which we will never get back, on a problem that never actually happened. In the words of Seneca, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Whenever you notice yourself suffering in imagination like that, you can return to the present moment where you are basically fine, or you wouldn't be listening to podcasts. Strengthen that habit. Get used to thinking, no, I will not let a phantom prediction of tomorrow spoil today. It is likely not even real. And if it is, I will deal with it when the problem actually shows up, but not before. Look after the problems of today and trust your future self to deal with those of tomorrow. I could also add here that very often, fears about what could go wrong in the future are only half-finished thoughts. They are incomplete simulations. For example, if I worry about losing my job, history does not end in the second when I read the letter where they fire me. Time goes on. So I might be shaken by the news, of course. But I go on to sleep that day, I digest the news, and then I start to react, I start to recover, and to make alternative plans, consider new jobs and a new direction in life. Things do not end at catastrophes. They shift and recover, like a tree that you cut a branch off of, and which does not spontaneously spark fire and does not stop growing, it just starts to grow in a different direction. People go on, and we solve problems. That's what humans do. All of life is basically an endless list of problems to solve, so we might as well get used to it and do it with a bit of joy while we're at it. Now, is excessive worrying about the future a problem that you think you have too? Finding out is quite easy. What portion of your time and energy do you spend on the problems of today? And how much on the hypothetical problems of tomorrow? Some amount of worry is of course natural, but you probably know it if you worry excessively. And the same goes for thinking too much about the past. A close friend of mine spent a lot of time idealizing past relationships. That was a pattern he had. It's quite normal to grieve, of course, but if you overdo the reminiscing about a beautiful past, you might be blind to what happens in the present. The past is many things, I suppose, and how we interpret it changes as we get older. My story changed over the years. And the future is not yet here. All we have is the present. And in the eternal words of Katja Zamolodchikova, if you have one leg in the past and another one in the future, you are pissing on today. And on that note, take a deep breath, connect with this moment right now, and chase away the phantoms of yesterday and tomorrow. In the next episode, we will talk about the basics of a good life and maintenance work. Doesn't that sound exciting? Thank you for tuning in again. And if you have any feedback, comments, or questions, shoot me an email at artisanal.happiness@gmail.com. See you next time.